The wind came off the prairie sharp as a knife, dry and stinging, cutting across her chapped face and tugging at her threadbare coat like it meant to steal it clean off her back. She stood barefoot at the edge of the town's main road, toes buried in dust and grit, her arms tight around herself. Her lips were cracked, her legs trembled under the weight of her own hunger. The road stretched wide and empty in both directions. The buildings around her, bleached wood storefronts, a shuttered saloon, the skeletal remains of a livery, offered no warmth, no welcome. A church bell rang from somewhere she couldn't see. One long, hollow note, then silence again. She had not eaten since the morning before last, unless stale biscuit crumbs counted. Her feet were raw from walking 60 miles, maybe more, from a camp she left behind in the dark. No note. No backward glance. She had left her 3 little siblings curled together like kittens on a pallet of straw, their ribs showing through their shirt. She had whispered a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "I'll come back for you," she had told them. Now she wasn't sure she'd even make it through the day. Her name was Clara, though no one had said it in weeks. Names went quiet out here. She had been the oldest, the one who cooked what little there was, cleaned what the others dirtied, and took the brunt of their father's fists when the bottle emptied and the devil returned to him. He was dead now, 2 months cold in the ground from a busted lung and rotgut, but his shadow lingered in their bones. A wagon creaked into view. Not fast, not slow. Driven by a man alone, reins in one hand, hat pulled low. The horses were dun-colored and lean. Dust curled around the wheels and rose behind them like smoke. She straightened, or tried to. Her knees gave a little. She stepped forward and raised her hand just high enough to be seen. The wagon stopped. She didn't run to it, didn't have the strength. But she reached it somehow. Her voice came out rough and small. "I'll work for food," she said. The cowboy looked down at her. Eyes pale blue, almost gray, like river ice. He said nothing for a long moment, the kind of silence that stretches wide like a canyon. Then he flicked the reins and guided the horses off the road into a patch of open ground. "Climb in if you're able," he said. His voice was dry and low. She looked at the wagon bed, then at her hands. They were scraped, blackened at the knuckles and shaking. She grasped the sideboard and tried to hoist herself. Slipped, tried again. Then the man was off the bench and lifting her as if she weighed nothing. She caught a whiff of sweat and leather and horses. His coat brushed her cheek, and she felt the warmth of it like a fire she hadn't known she missed. He set her down in the bed, handed her a wool blanket folded under the bench, then climbed back up without another word. They rode in silence. The wheels clattered. The sun sank lower, painting the prairie in deep gold. She clutched the blanket to her chest, her teeth starting to chatter now that her body dared to feel something again. From the front, the man reached back and handed her a half loaf of hard bread wrapped in oilcloth. She stared at it. "You can eat," he said. She tore a piece off with trembling hands and chewed slow. The bread tasted like heaven and ash. After a while he spoke again. "Name's Eli." She swallowed hard. "Clara." He nodded, as if the names were 2 stones he laid side by side on some invisible path. They didn't speak again. But when she dozed off, the wagon still rumbling beneath her, she didn't feel afraid. Only cold, tired, and not entirely alone. The house stood on a rise above a dry creek bed, half hidden by a stand of cottonwoods whose leaves had gone brittle and yellow with the season. A lean-to barn slouched behind it, ribs of weathered timber showing through patchwork repairs. A single cow stood inside the corral, chewing slow, indifferent to the strangers arriving. Eli pulled the wagon up alongside the porch and set the brake. He stepped down, then looked back at Clara. "You able to walk?" She nodded and made it to the edge, legs stiff, hands gripping the sideboard. He didn't offer to help this time. He watched. She slid down unsteady but kept her footing. Her feet stung with each step, blistered, raw blood stuck to dirt. Wait here." He disappeared into the house door, banging behind him. Clara stood in the yard, arms tight across her chest, the blanket still draped around her like a shawl. The wind had died, but the air stayed sharp. She looked up at the sky, where the sun dragged the last light westward, leaving long streaks of red. The smell of dust and dry grass hung thick around her. When he came back, he was carrying a basin and a folded pair of socks. He set them down on the porch, then nodded toward them. "Wash your feet. You can sit on the step." Clara crouched, lowering herself slow onto the bottom stair. Her bones ached. The water was warm, surprisingly so. Her breath caught in her throat when she lowered her feet in. Mud bled into the basin. She didn't speak. Neither did he. When she finished, he handed her the socks. "They're clean." She pulled them on, careful. The wool scratched, but the heat sank into her skin like grace. He held the door open. She followed him inside. The house smelled of wood smoke and pine soap. Sparse but clean. One large room with a stove, a table, a cot pushed against the far wall, and shelves built into the plaster. A shotgun rested over the doorframe. He pointed to a wooden bench near the stove. "Sit. I'll fix something." Clara sat. Her eyes followed him as he moved, deliberate quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't come from shyness, but from habit. He took beans from a jar, added them to a small pot, poured water from a kettle, set the pot on the stove. His hands were scarred, the skin at the knuckles cracked and brown. She wondered what kind of life had built those hands. He caught her watching and didn't flinch from it. "You come far." 60 miles, maybe more." He gave a small nod. "That's a long walk for someone empty. I left my siblings behind. Had to." Her voice cracked. "3 of 'em. I didn't want to." He didn't say anything right away, just stirred the pot. "You plan on going back for them?" "If I make enough. If I don't die first." "You won't die here." Something in his voice, firm, quiet, made her look at him. He served her the beans in a dented tin bowl. She didn't wait for more words. She ate, slowly at first, then faster. Afterward, she washed the bowl without being asked, found the pump outside and scrubbed it with cold water that numbed her wrist. When she came back in, he was folding a second blanket on the cot. "You can sleep there," he said. "I'll take the floor." She hesitated. "I don't expect anything from you," he added, looking her in the eye. She believed him. She lay down, fully clothed, the blanket pulled up to her chin. The cot smelled faintly of cedar and saddle soap. Eli sat across the room, sharpening a knife with slow, even strokes. The sound was steady, not threatening, just part of the night. Her eyes closed. That was the first night she slept indoors in nearly a month, and the first in a long while where she didn't wake up afraid. If this road mattered, subscribe and follow it. Morning came with a low moan of wind through the cottonwoods, and the smell of coffee drifting from the stove. Clara stirred beneath the blanket limbs, slow to remember they were safe. The light through the window was thin and gray. Frost clung to the corners of the glass like a warning. Eli was already up, seated at the table, reading from a leather-bound book with one hand around a steaming mug. He didn't look up when she sat up, just spoke like he already knew she was awake. "There's bread and lard on the table. Coffee, too, if you want it." She stood, brushing her hands down her dress. The fabric was stiff from days of dust and sweat. She took the bread and sat across from him. He poured her a cup without asking. The coffee was black and bitter and hot. It burned her tongue, and she welcomed it. "You feel up to work?" he asked. Clara nodded. "Yes." He set the book down and looked at her square. "I'll be clear. I need help with the chores. You earn your food, you keep your place here. That's the way of it." She didn't flinch. "That's fair." So the days began. He showed her how to milk the cow, how to mend fence line, how to stack the wood so it wouldn't rot. Her hands cracked and bled. She bandaged them with rags and worked anyway. When she winced, Ellie said nothing, but she noticed he left smaller bundles for her to carry after that. When her legs buckled while hauling water, he looked away but walked slower beside her on the next trip. He was a quiet man, the kind of quiet that had roots like trees that had learned not to bend for the wind anymore. But he wasn't cruel. He made space for her to speak, though he never pushed. Sometimes he told her names of birds. Once, as they ate by lantern light, he said, "There was music in this house once. My mother played the fiddle. Broke my heart when she died." He said it like a fact, not a wound. Clara carried that moment with her for the rest of the week. One evening she stood by the barn watching dusk fall over the hills. Her arms ached. Her apron was streaked with ash from the stove, but there was a peace in her chest she hadn't known in a long while. Eli stepped up beside her, silent as always. She said, "You live like this every day?" He nodded. "Since my father passed." Just kept on. "You ever think about leaving?" His answer came after a long pause. "Left once. Didn't take." She didn't ask more. She knew the kind of stories that sat behind silence like that. The wind picked up. She shivered. He unwrapped the scarf from his neck and handed it to her. "Take it," he said. "You need it worse than I do." She hesitated, but his eyes didn't carry charity, just a plain offer. She wrapped it around her neck, and it smelled faintly of tobacco and sun. That night she slept deeper than she had in weeks. Not from exhaustion, but because the silence in the house no longer felt empty. It felt shared. By the second week, Clara had found the rhythm of the place. The mornings began with firewood and water, the noons with fence repairs, the evenings with stew or beans, sometimes cornbread if she could find enough flour in the sack. Her hands were tougher now. Her back didn't ache the same way. She started humming while she worked. Nothing grand, just low, wordless songs that had clung to her from childhood. Tunes her mother used to hum while boiling potatoes before the sickness came. Eli noticed, though he didn't mention it. He'd tip his hat to her when she came in from the pasture or pass her a tin cup of water without a word. But some days he lingered nearby just a little longer, like the sound of her voice in the air made the house feel more like a home and less like a holding place for old ghosts. One afternoon the sky turned strange, too still. Too quiet, the kind of quiet where the birds vanish and the air goes yellow at the edges. Eli stepped outside, looked long at the clouds coming in from the west, and told her to pull the animals in. They worked fast. The wind picked up hard and sharp, rattling the windows. By nightfall the storm had found them. Clara stood in the doorway watching the lightning crawl across the hills like veins of fire. Eli came up beside her and gently closed the door. "Don't tempt it," he said. "Storm like this wind could suck the roof clean off." They lit the lantern and sat close to the stove. The wind screamed around the walls. Rain pounded the windows. He reached under the bench and pulled out a small carved box. "Here," he said, "something to pass the time." Inside were dominoes worn smooth with use. Clara smiled. "I haven't played in years. You remember how?" "Think so." They played 3 rounds. He beat her the first 2 fair and silent. On the third, she laid her last tile with a grin and looked up at him. "You let me win." "No," he said, "you just remembered how." She laughed. A real laugh, the kind that made her eyes water and her ribs ache a little. Eli leaned back in his chair. His face was still, but something in his shoulders eased. "You've got a good laugh," he said. Hadn't used it in a while. The lantern light caught the lines around his eyes, the roughness of his jaw, the faint curve of a smile that came and went like a passing breeze. The storm raged outside, but neither of them moved to leave the table. Later that night, as she lay on the cot listening to the thunder fade into distant growls, she thought about her siblings. How they'd stare wide-eyed if they saw her now dry-fed safe. She knew they were still waiting. She could almost hear Susanna whispering to the younger boys, keeping them calm. "I'll come back for you," she had said. And now she believed she could. She would earn her place. She would save what she could. And when the spring came, if the road didn't kill her, she'd walk it again. But tonight, as rain tapped the roof and the wind softened into sleep, she let herself rest. Just for a little while longer. Winter set in early that year. By mid-November, frost had dug in for good, whitening the mornings and making every chore feel heavier. Clara rose before the sun each day, kindling the stove with numb fingers, breath curling in the cold air as she worked. Eli began letting her take the lead, splitting kindling, checking the stock, preparing meals. Not because he expected her to, but because she did it well and with care. She never cut corners, never wasted a thing. She didn't talk much, but when she did, her words carried weight. "You live simple," she told him one night as they sat near the stove, both of them silent for nearly an hour before that. He looked up from the leather harness he was mending. "Simpler than most." She nodded. "There's peace in it." He studied her for a long beat. "Is that what you're looking for?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted to the window, to the black sky beyond it. "I don't know if I ever looked," she said. "Just tried to stay ahead of hunger and pain. I guess peace would be new." Eli set the leather aside. "It's harder to hold than it looks." "Maybe. But it's worth more than money, I think." She said it without thinking, but saw something shift in him. Just a flicker. He nodded once. "My father used to say that, though he lived like the opposite was true." Clara looked at him. He rarely mentioned his past. What happened to him? Shot. Over a cattle line. He was right, but it didn't matter. The words hung between them, quiet and cold. Clara thought of her own father, how he'd rotted in that shack full of empty jars and anger. She had wished him dead long before he was. But she didn't say that. Instead, she said, "I think some men just don't know how to carry what they're given." Eli looked at her for a long time. "And some women do." She flushed and turned her face back toward the stove. Later that week, she found a small wooden box tucked on the bottom shelf of the hutch while sweeping. Inside were folded papers, worn letters, a broken watch. And near the bottom, a photograph, faded but clear enough to see a woman with dark hair and eyes like Ellie's. She wore a prairie dress and held a fiddle in her lap. Clara didn't ask. Just closed the box and put it back where she found it. But that night at supper, Eli said, "You found the box." She looked up. "That was my mother," he said. "She came from Missouri. Said the wind out here made her feel alive. She was beautiful. She was everything." The words caught like a snag on cloth. He didn't say more, and she didn't press. But she understood now something more about the quiet in him. It wasn't emptiness. It was memory. They shared more after that. Not confessions exactly, but truths in small pieces. Eli told her he'd once wanted to be a school teacher. Clara told him she used to dream of owning a dress shop with bolts of blue calico and shelves of lace. "I still can't sew worth a damn," she admitted, laughing. He smiled. "That's all right. I've still got books I never finished reading." By December, the cabin felt different, warmer even when the fire was low. One evening, she found a bundle wrapped in brown paper at the foot of her cot. Inside, a pair of soft leather gloves and a bar of milled soap, still faintly lavender. She looked over at Eli, who was near the door taking off his boots. "You didn't have to," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I wanted to." Clara held the gloves in her lap. She didn't speak, but something in her eyes softened. Later that night, Eli stepped out to check the barn. She watched him from the window. Snow had begun to fall, slow and steady. His figure moved through it like part of the land, quiet, firm belonging. And for the first time, Clara wondered what it would mean to stay, not just for winter, but for good. It came suddenly, the trouble, as most things did out here, without warning, without mercy. The snow had barely stopped falling when the rider appeared. A tall figure on a black horse coat flapping in the wind like wings, face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Clara was hanging laundry when she spotted him on the ridge. Her breath caught. She stepped back toward the porch, her hands still red from the washwater. Eli stepped outside beside her, slow, cautious. He saw the man and his jaw tightened. The rider came down the hill without haste, like he knew he'd be received. He stopped 10 yards from the house, dismounted, and led the horse forward. When he got close enough, Clara saw the badge on his coat. Marshal Ellie said, not warmly. The man nodded. Ellie Turner. You're looking at him. The marshal glanced at Clara, then back to Ellie. Need a word. In private. Ellie didn't budge. She stays. The marshal didn't argue. He took off his gloves, slow, tucked them into his belt. You've got a girl named Clara living here. Clara's stomach dropped. She didn't move, but her hands went cold. She's here, Eli said, voice like stone. She's wanted for questioning, the marshal said. There's been talk. A claim from a man near Sulphur Creek says she took off with a horse and coin purse. Left 3 kids behind. Clara took a step forward. That's a lie. The marshal looked at her, then really looked. That's so. I left to find food. I didn't steal nothing. That horse was half dead. He beat us. Left my brothers and sister with bruises and no bread for 3 days. Her voice broke and she steadied it. He's lying. Or worse. The marshal squinted at her. Fella's name is Shaw. Says he was their guardian. Eli let out a slow breath. That man ever been to court? Twice, the marshal admitted. Drunk and disorderly. Never stuck. Clara's hands were shaking now. Not with fear, but rage. I'll go back. I'll speak for myself. But if you send me back to him without hearing my side, without even asking the children, you'll be sending me to a grave. The wind had picked up again, swirling dry snow through the yard. Eli stepped forward, placing himself slightly between her and the marshal. You have a legal warrant? No, the marshal said, stiffening. Just a complaint for now. But I'll have to report back. And if she leaves, she's not leaving. Clara stared at Eli. He didn't look back at her. Just kept his eyes on the marshal. The man frowned. You harbor her, it could come down on you. Eli nodded once. Let it. There was a long silence, broken only by the creak of the marshal's saddle as he turned his horse back around. I'll return, he said, with or without the papers. When he was gone, Clara stood in the cold yard, stunned. Eli turned to her, eyes steady. Tell me the whole truth, he said. Now. She did. Everything. The hunger, the beatings, the day she stole that sick horse and rode until its knees gave out. The children. The way Shaw would lock the door and drink until he couldn't speak. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. When she finished, Ellie didn't speak right away. He looked down at the frozen ground and at her. We'll ride back, he said. Not today, but soon. Together. Clara blinked, unsure she'd heard him right. You mean it? I know the kind of man you're talking about. And I know what kind of woman it takes to walk away from him with her soul still hers. He reached out then, slow, and placed his hand on her shoulder. It was the first time he'd touched her without cause. You're not alone anymore. That night she sat at the table staring at the firelight dancing across the floor. Outside the wind howled like it meant to strip the world bare. But inside she was warm. Not just from the fire. From something steadier. Something she hadn't known in years. Hope. They waited 3 weeks. Snow deepened across the prairie, blanketing the trail and slowing everything that moved, including the law. Clara spent those days like someone holding her breath underwater, doing the chores, feeding the animals, cooking what little they had left, all while watching the horizon for the glint of a bat. Eli was quiet but different now. Not distant, just carrying something he hadn't before. She caught him watching her when she laughed, when she scrubbed her hands at the pump, when she brushed snow from the barn roof. His gaze held something soft in it, unspoken, steady. She hadn't felt seen like that in years. He never tried to touch her again, but every gesture, passing her a cup, setting aside the work he knew would wear on her back, drawing her chair closer to the stove without saying a word, spoke louder than hands ever could. Then one morning, without a cloud in the sky, Ellie said, "We leave tomorrow." Clara froze in the doorway. "You're sure?" He nodded. "Weather's turned. We'll ride to Sulphur Creek. I want that man to look you in the eye and lie." The plan was simple. They'd bring supplies, stay the night at the small mission house if they had to. Clara would speak to the sheriff. She'd tell everything, and Eli would stand beside her when she did. She packed that night with shaking hands. The only dress she had, a small loaf of cornmeal bread, and the letter she'd written to her siblings but never sent. She didn't know if the law would believe her, but she knew this: she wouldn't run anymore, and she wouldn't let Eli carry the weight alone. They left before dawn. The air was sharp, the kind that burned in your lungs. The horse stepped carefully through the drifts, and Eli rode beside her, his coat dusted white by the time the sun rose behind them. Clara hadn't been back that way since she'd fled. Every bend in the trail held ghosts, trees she'd hidden behind, fences she'd ducked under, the spot where the horse collapsed, and she kept walking on blistered feet. As they neared town, the nerves came hard. Her stomach turned. Her throat tightened. "What if they don't believe me?" she asked. Eli didn't answer right away. Then he said, "They don't have to. I do." That stopped her. She looked over at him, and he met her eyes without flinching. "Truth doesn't vanish just because men choose not to see it," he said. When they rode into Sulphur Creek, the town was quiet, just smoke from chimneys and the creak of a shop sign in the wind. Eli tied the horses and walked with her to the sheriff's office, boots crunching through old snow. The sheriff was an older man with a lined face and a gaze like a cold river. He looked up from his desk as they entered. "I figured you might show," he said. The marshal came through. Clara stepped forward. Her voice shook once, then steadied. "I want to give a statement about Henry Shaw, about what he did to us." Eli stood just behind her, arms crossed, unmoving. The sheriff didn't interrupt. He listened, asked a few sharp questions, wrote things down with the slowness of someone weighing every word. When she finished, the room was quiet. The sheriff sat back. "Truth is, I've had complaints about Shaw before," he said. "No one ever stuck around long enough to say it plain. You might be the first." He looked at Eli. "You willing to vouch for her character?" "I'll put my life on it." The sheriff nodded. "That'll do." They left the office and walked out into the afternoon light. The snow had begun to fall again, soft, steady, harmless. On the edge of town, at the little whitewashed mission house, Clara saw them, 3 small figures in the yard. Susanna first, taller than she remembered, hair tied back with a strip of faded calico, then the boys tumbling toward her in the snow. She didn't run. She fell to her knees and held them as tight as her arms would let her. "I told you I'd come back," she whispered. Susanna cried into her coat. The younger boy, Thomas, clung to her waist. The little one, Micah, just said, "I knew it." Later, when they rode back toward Ellie's ranch, the wagon fuller, now Clara looked over at him. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I did," he said, "because you're not someone I could forget. And they're not either." She took his gloved hand in hers, and for the first time in her life the road ahead looked more like a beginning than an escape. Spring arrived quiet like it was testing the land. The snow melted slow in streaks along the fence line and puddles beneath the porch. Shoots of green pushed through the black soil where Eli and Clara had begun to clear a patch for planting. She had never put seed in the ground before, not like this, not for a future that might be hers. The children settled in fast, as children do when they know they're safe. Susanna helped Clara with the washing and the meals, already learning the rhythms of the house without needing to be told. The boys ran wild through the fields, building forts from branches, chasing each other until dusk, their laughter carrying across the land like music. Eli built them bunks in the barn loft at first, but when the nights turned warmer, he added a second room to the cabin, just one wall at a time, measuring twice sawing boards with patient hands. Clara watched him through the window, flour dust on her arms, the bread rising in the warmest spot by the stove. One night after the children were asleep, Clara stepped outside and found him sitting on the porch, hat low over his eyes, pipe burning low. She sat beside him without speaking. The stars were out in full, thick and clear as spilled salt. "I didn't think I'd have this again," she said finally. "This, a life." She hesitated. "Something that didn't just hurt." Eli nodded. "Takes time to believe in it, even when it's right in front of you." She looked over at him. "Do you believe in it now?" He took the pipe from his mouth. "Every day I do more." They sat like that a long while. The air smelled of pine smoke and thawed earth. Somewhere in the barn, the cow stirred in her sleep. Clara leaned her head gently on his shoulder. He didn't move. Just let it be. Weeks passed. The ground softened. They planted beans, squash, potatoes. The children learned how to gather eggs, how to mend a torn shirt. Clara began teaching Susanna her letters by lamplight, sounding out the words slowly while Eli listened from the corner, whittling a piece of cedar into the shape of a horse. He handed it to Micah when he finished. The boy held it like a treasure. It wasn't all easy. The boys fought. A windstorm tore the roof shingles off the barn. Susanna cried herself to sleep once quietly, not saying why. But it was real. And it held. One afternoon, Clara stood at the table, sewing by hand, squinting hard. Eli stepped in, dirt on his hands from digging fence posts. "You never told me," he said, watching her. "Told you what?" "That you're the strongest person I've ever known." She smiled at him, soft and tired and full. "I never thought I'd hear that in this life." He stepped forward, reached into his pocket, pulled out a ring. Simple gold, worn at the edges. "It was my mother's," he said. "She gave it to me when she knew I'd stopped believing in things. Told me not to give it to anyone unless I was sure." Clara stared at it, then at him. "I don't have anything to give you," she whispered. "You already gave it," he said. "You came back. You stayed." She didn't cry. She didn't need to. She held out her hand and he slipped the ring on, slow, careful, like planting a seed in spring ground. The children cheered when they heard. Micah ran in circles until he fell over. Susanna hugged her and wouldn't let go. That night, Clara wrote a letter. It didn't say much, just a few lines. "We're safe now. We're home. The land is kind and the man is good." She folded it, set it on the shelf, and let the wind carry her dreams for once, not into fear, but into tomorrow. The porch light burned behind her as she stepped out, Eli standing there waiting. She took his hand. The sky above was endless, but the house was full. Subscribe and keep pace with the frontier.